"I'm frostbitten, I need warmth," whispered the Apache woman, but the rancher. The wind cut through the landscape like a sharp knife, and the few trees scattered across the land were bare, their branches trembling under the icy pressure. It was a land that demanded respect, a land where only the strong, the careful, and the clever could survive. Yet it was also a land where chance encounters could change lives forever. Somewhere in the midst of this frozen expanse, a lone figure stumbled through the snow. Her movements were slow, painful, and unsteady. She was thin, wrapped in layers of worn clothing that offered little protection against the biting cold. Frost had already claimed parts of her fingers and toes, leaving them numb and stiff. Her dark hair clung to her face, wet from the snow melting on her skin, and her eyes, though tired and wary, burned with a fierce determination to survive. This was an Apache woman. She had been forced to flee her village days ago after a sudden attack had swept through her home. She had lost many loved ones, and the journey to safety had been long and treacherous. Every step she took across the frozen plains was a fight against the cold, against hunger, and against the fear that someone might find her before she could find shelter. Her mind, though clouded with exhaustion, was sharp enough to keep her moving, one careful step at a time. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Her body ached from the cold and her lungs burned with every breath of the icy air. She had almost given up hope when she saw a faint light in the distance. At first, she thought it was a trick of her tired eyes, a mirage caused by the endless whiteness of the snow. But as she drew closer, she realized it was real warmth and life in the middle of the harsh wilderness. A small cabin stood alone, smoke curling from its chimney, promising fire and safety. Her heart leaped, and a fragile hope bloomed within her chest. But she knew she could not demand shelter. She could only ask, and she whispered through chattering teeth, "Please, warmth, I am frostbitten." The words were barely audible over the howl of the wind, but they carried her desperation and her plea for survival. Inside the cabin, a man stirred at the sound of the faint cry. He was a rancher, a man who had lived alone for many years on this stretch of land. He was middle-aged, with weathered hands and a face carved by years of sun, wind, and hard work. He had seen people pass by his land, travelers, traders, and the occasional wanderer, but he had learned to be cautious. The Southwest was full of dangers, and trust was not something given lightly. When he looked through the frost-streaked window and saw the figure struggling against the snow, something in him shifted. It was hard to describe. Perhaps it was the raw human need he recognized, or perhaps it was a memory of someone he had once known. He felt a tug at his heart that he could not ignore, but caution whispered in his mind as well. The Apache people had been in conflict with settlers and ranchers in the past. Many feared them. Many judged them without knowing their story. And yet here she was, clearly in need, her body trembling, her lips blue with cold, and her eyes pleading. He put on his thick coat, grabbed a lantern, and stepped outside into the biting cold. The snow crunched under his boots as he approached the woman. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of him, a mixture of fear and hope flickering across her face. She instinctively pulled her shawl tighter around her, but she could not move any further. Her legs were stiff, almost frozen, and her strength was almost gone. The rancher knelt down beside her, careful not to startle her. He extended a gloved hand. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You'll freeze out here. You need warmth." For a moment she hesitated. She had been taught to be wary of strangers, to hide from danger, to survive first and ask questions later. But the cold had taken too much from her already, and she could not refuse. Slowly, she allowed him to help her to her feet. Every movement was painful. Frostbitten limbs did not bend easily, and her breathing came in short, painful gasps. They walked carefully toward the cabin. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wave, a sensation so intense she nearly cried. The rancher guided her to a chair near the hearth and wrapped her in heavy blankets. She could feel the heat slowly seeping into her body, melting the frostbite from her fingers and toes, though she knew the pain would linger for some time. The rancher busied himself with the fire, adding logs and making sure the flames were strong and steady. He brought her a cup of water, then some dried meat, which she accepted cautiously. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she could not eat much, only small bites at a time, as her body struggled to adjust from the freezing cold outside to the warmth inside. For a while, neither spoke. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside there was a fragile sense of safety. The rancher watched her closely, noting the bruises on her arms, the scars that hinted at past struggles, and the exhaustion that weighed down her small frame. He realized that she was not just a stranger, she was a survivor, someone who had endured hardships he could hardly imagine. She finally spoke, her voice a whisper but steadying. "Thank you," she said, the words simple yet full of meaning. I do not have anyone. I have nowhere to go." The rancher nodded slowly. "You're safe here for now, you can rest. We'll see what comes next when the morning comes." The night stretched on and the woman fell into a light, feverish sleep. The rancher watched the fire, lost in thought. He remembered the stories he had heard about Apache people, stories told in fear, stories told by those who had never understood. And now, sitting there in the flickering light of his cabin, he realized that fear had blinded him. This woman, frostbitten and weary, was not an enemy. She was human just like him, deserving of warmth, kindness, and a chance to live. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, for the first time in a long while, there was peace. The rancher and the Apache woman were strangers bound by circumstance, yet something had shifted in that cold, lonely night. It was the beginning of a fragile trust, a bond that would grow slowly in the days to come. He knew the journey ahead would not be easy. There were neighbors who would question his decision, dangers that lurked in the snow, and the fear that the woman might not survive her injuries. But in that moment, he felt a certainty he had never felt before. Helping someone in need, saving a life, was worth every risk. Morning would come soon, bringing new challenges and decisions. But for now, he simply tended the fire, ensuring it burned bright and steady, and watched as the woman, finally warm and safe for the first time in days, began to regain her strength. He did not know her story fully, nor did she know his, but they shared something stronger than words. The silent understanding that in the harshest of places, humanity could still be found. And so, as the wind howled and snow drifted against the cabin walls, a story began, one of survival, trust, and the slow breaking down of fear and prejudice, in the most unlikely of friendships. The morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows, casting a soft glow across the rancher's cabin. Outside, the world was still a frozen expanse, with snow covering every tree and fence post, but inside, the warmth from the fire filled the room. The Apache woman stirred, blinking against the brightness, her body still weak from the night's ordeal. Her fingers and toes throbbed painfully, a reminder of how close she had been to losing everything to the cold. The rancher sat nearby, quietly observing her. He had kept watch throughout the night, his mind restless with thoughts he could not shake. He wondered who she really was, where she came from, and what had brought her to this lonely place. And yet, amidst the questions, one simple truth remained. She was alive, and that was all that mattered for now. The woman struggled to sit upright, her body aching with every movement. She clutched the blankets around her tightly, as if holding herself together with their warmth. I am grateful," she whispered, her voice still weak. You saved my life." The rancher nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You were in bad shape," he said gently. "If you had stayed outside a little longer, I don't know if you would have made it. You need rest, and then we will see what we can do." The woman nodded, too tired to speak more. She sank back into the blankets, letting herself feel the heat against her skin. For the first time in days, she did not have to struggle against the cold, against hunger, or against the fear that someone might find her. For the first time in days, she could simply breathe. As the hours passed, the rancher went about his work, chopping wood and tending to his animals, but he kept an eye on her. He brought her small portions of food, careful not to overwhelm her, and encouraged her to drink water to help her body recover. Each small bite and sip strengthened her, and slowly, color returned to her cheeks. Finally, when she felt strong enough, the woman began to speak. Her voice was still quiet but steady. She told the rancher fragments of her story, how her village had been attacked, how she had fled into the snow, and how she had been alone for days, struggling to survive. She spoke of the people she had lost, of the fear that had followed her every step, and of the hope that had kept her moving forward. The rancher listened in silence, feeling a mixture of sadness and respect. He had known hardship in his own life, the harsh winters, the struggles of keeping the ranch running, the loneliness that came with living far from others. But what she had endured was different. She had faced not only the cold and hunger but the terror of losing everything she loved. And yet she had survived. As the day wore on, the woman regained more of her strength. She helped the rancher with small tasks around the cabin, moving slowly but with careful determination. She learned how to carry firewood without tipping it over, how to stir food without spilling it, and how to check on the animals without startling them. The rancher watched her, impressed by her resilience and intelligence. He realized that she was not only a survivor but also a person with skills and knowledge that could be valuable in this harsh environment. Despite the growing bond, there was still tension in the air. The rancher's neighbors would not understand why he had taken in an Apache woman, and he knew there could be consequences if word spread. But he also knew that turning her away, leaving her to the merciless cold, would be a choice he could not live with. His conscience would not allow it. Over the next few days, the woman's body continued to heal, and her trust in the rancher began to grow. She learned to rely on him, not just for warmth and food, but for guidance and protection. In turn, the rancher began to see her as more than a stranger. He saw her courage, her intelligence, and her humanity. Slowly, the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. They spent long hours talking by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts. She spoke of her family, the traditions of her people, and the land she had once called home. He shared stories of his own life, the challenges of running a ranch, and the lessons he had learned from years of living in isolation. Though their experiences were different, they found common ground in their struggles and their desire to survive. One afternoon, a fierce windstorm swept across the plains. The snow blew so hard that it nearly buried the cabin, and the temperature dropped to dangerous levels. The rancher and the woman worked together to secure the cabin, reinforcing the doors and windows and ensuring that the fire remained strong. The storm raged outside, but inside, they found safety and warmth in each other's presence. During that storm, the woman demonstrated her knowledge of survival in harsh conditions. She taught the rancher how to insulate the cabin more effectively, how to ration food and water, and how to recognize the early signs of frostbite before it became dangerous. The rancher listened carefully, realizing that her skills were invaluable. In return, he taught her some of his own knowledge about the land, the animals, and the ways of ranch life. Together, they formed a partnership, built on mutual respect and the shared goal of survival. As the days turned into a week, the woman regained her strength fully. She could walk without assistance, tend to the animals, and even help with the small chores around the cabin. The rancher noticed subtle changes in himself as well. He found that he enjoyed her company, that her presence brought a sense of life and energy to the quiet cabin that he had not felt in years. He also realized that his fear and prejudice were slowly fading, replaced by understanding and empathy. Yet, despite the growing bond, both knew that the world outside the cabin was still dangerous. The woman had enemies, and there were people who would not hesitate to harm her if they found her. The rancher also knew that helping her could bring trouble from his neighbors, who might see his actions as foolish or even dangerous. But both were committed to facing whatever challenges came together, knowing that trust and friendship were stronger than fear. One evening, as the sun set behind the snow-covered hills, the woman stood by the fire, watching the flames dance. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. "I have been alone for so long, I did not know there could be kindness in this world." The rancher looked at her, his expression softening. Kindness exists, even in the harshest places. Sometimes it takes courage to see it, but it is there. They shared a moment of silence, the kind that comes from understanding and shared experience. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the cabin was filled with warmth, both from the fire and from the bond that had formed between them. Over the next few days, their routines settled into a rhythm. The woman learned more about ranch life, and the rancher learned more about her culture and skills. They shared meals, tended to the animals, and even laughed together, finding joy in small moments despite the harshness of their surroundings. It became clear to both that this was not a temporary arrangement. They had begun to rely on each other, not just for survival, but for companionship. The rancher found comfort in knowing that he was not alone, and the woman found safety in knowing that she had someone who cared for her. Together, they began to rebuild a sense of normalcy, even in the midst of winter's challenges. Yet, the outside world remained a concern. The rancher knew that word of the woman's presence could reach people who might not understand her situation, and he feared what might happen if she were discovered. The woman, too, knew that her journey was not over, that she could not remain in one place forever. But for now, they focused on the present, on staying safe, staying warm, and learning from each other. By the end of the week, the woman was no longer the fragile, frostbitten figure who had stumbled into the cabin. She was strong, capable, and aware of her surroundings. She could move through the snow with confidence, tend to the animals with skill, and even help the rancher make decisions about daily tasks. The rancher, in turn, had grown to trust her completely, recognizing that her presence was not a threat, but a gift. And so life in the cabin continued, each day bringing new lessons, new challenges, and new moments of connection. The bond between the rancher and the Apache woman deepened, built on shared experiences, trust, and the understanding that kindness could flourish even in the coldest, most isolated places. In those quiet days, as snow continued to fall outside, they discovered that survival was not just about warmth or food. It was about connection, empathy, and the courage to open one's heart to another, even when the world seemed harsh and unforgiving. The days grew longer as winter slowly loosened its grip on the plains, though the cold still lingered stubbornly in the wind and snow. Inside the cabin, life had taken on a quiet rhythm. The Apache woman and the rancher had settled into routines that balanced work, survival, and small moments of connection. The woman's strength had returned, and she moved through the cabin and surrounding land with confidence and skill, while the rancher found himself relying on her more than he had expected. The woman, whose name was Nayeli, had begun to share pieces of her life, her stories weaving a tapestry of resilience and tradition. She spoke of the forests and rivers near her home, of the songs and dances of her people, and of the lessons taught to her by her family. The rancher, whose name was Thomas, listened carefully. He had always thought of himself as practical, grounded, and rooted in his routines, but Nayeli's words sparked something he had long forgotten, the ability to imagine, to wonder, and to feel deeply. One morning, as Thomas prepared breakfast over the fire, Nayeli approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Thomas," she said quietly, "there are ways to make the land safer for us. I can teach you some of what I know about tracking and survival. It might help us if danger comes." Thomas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Tracking? You mean finding animals or people?" "Both," she replied. "The land speaks to those who listen, It tells you where water is, where the wind hides, and where danger might be coming from. You have to pay attention. Thomas nodded slowly. Though he had lived on this land for years, he realized there was still much to learn. He had relied on experience and tools, but Naeli brought a different perspective, one that came from living intimately with the land, understanding its rhythms and respecting its moods. Over the next few days, she taught him how to read tracks in the snow, how to notice subtle changes in the wind, and how to recognize signs that animals or humans had passed through an area. Thomas found himself amazed at her skill. Her knowledge was precise and instinctive, a combination of careful observation and deep intuition. Slowly, he began to adopt some of her methods, noticing things he had once overlooked. Their bond deepened during these lessons. They laughed at mistakes, celebrated small successes, and shared quiet moments by the fire in the evenings. Naeli spoke of her journey with a mixture of sorrow and pride, recounting how she had survived in the wild, relying on her wits and courage. Thomas, in turn, shared stories from his life on the ranch, the long, lonely winters, the hard work, and the small joys of caring for the animals and the land. Despite their growing trust, the outside world remained a silent threat. Rumors of her presence could reach people who might not understand, and there were those who viewed the Apache with fear or hostility. Naeli herself was cautious. She knew that she could not stay in one place forever, and she kept a watchful eye on the horizon, always aware that danger might be approaching. One day, as they worked together to repair a section of the fence, Thomas noticed a change in Naeli's demeanor. She paused frequently, her eyes scanning the distant hills, and she seemed tense. "Something worries you," he observed, handing her a hammer. Naeli shook her head. "I am thinking about those who may be looking for me. I survived so far, but the world beyond this cabin is not always kind. We must be prepared." Thomas nodded, understanding her caution. "Then we will be ready," he said firmly. "We have the land, the animals, and each other. That is enough for now." Their preparations became a shared task. They strengthened the cabin, stored extra food, and mapped out escape routes in case of emergencies. Naeli's knowledge of the land proved invaluable, and Thomas began to see that her presence was not just a gift of survival, but also a partnership that enriched both of their lives. Amid the practical work, they also shared moments of quiet reflection. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink over the snow-covered plains, Naeli spoke of her family. "I lost many," she said softly, her voice carrying a deep sadness. "But I carry their memory with me. It is what gives me strength." Thomas listened, feeling a profound respect for her resilience. "I have lost people too," he admitted. "Life here can be lonely, and the world is not always forgiving. But meeting you, it has changed how I see things. You remind me that courage and kindness can exist even in the hardest places." Naeli smiled faintly, a gesture that carried warmth and gratitude. "And you remind me that not everyone is my enemy. Trust is hard to find, but it can be built slowly, like a fire that starts with a spark." Their relationship continued to evolve. They began to share not just survival skills and stories, but also small joys, watching the sunrise over the snow, sharing laughter at minor mishaps, and enjoying the comfort of companionship. Thomas found himself looking forward to her insights, her stories, and even her quiet presence, while Naeli grew to rely on his strength, experience, and gentle guidance. However, the fragile peace was not without tension. The memory of danger always lingered at the edges of their lives. Thomas worried about neighbors who might disapprove, and Naeli remained vigilant about people who might harm her. But together, they created a bubble of safety, a world where trust and understanding allowed them to navigate the harsh winter with courage. One day, while exploring the outskirts of the ranch, Naeli discovered tracks in the snow that were unfamiliar and troubling. She motioned for Thomas to come closer and examine them carefully. "Someone has been here recently," she said. "Not animals, humans. We need to be careful." Thomas frowned, feeling the tension that had always lurked in the back of his mind. "Do you think it's someone looking for you?" he asked. "I do not know," Naeli admitted. "But we cannot take chances. We must be ready for anything." That evening, they reinforced the cabin further, moved some supplies to hidden locations, and discussed plans for potential emergencies. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside. The uncertainty of the world beyond the cabin weighed heavily, but it also strengthened their resolve. They realized that their survival depended not just on skills and preparation, but on the trust and cooperation they had built. During the long nights, they shared more of their pasts, learning about each other's fears, hopes, and dreams. Naeli spoke of her desire to see her people again, to find safety and peace, and to honor the memories of those she had lost. Thomas shared his wish for companionship, for a life where trust and kindness could exist, and for the hope that he could help someone in need without fear. Their conversations deepened their understanding of each other, creating a bond that went beyond mere survival. They began to see themselves as a team, capable of facing challenges together, and their connection became a source of strength in the harsh winter. As the days passed, Naeli became more confident in her abilities, moving through the snow with ease, tending to animals, and helping Thomas with the work around the ranch. Thomas, in turn, grew to respect her not just for her skills, but for her wisdom, resilience, and the quiet courage that shone through even in the darkest moments. One afternoon, while gathering firewood, Thomas paused and looked at her with admiration. "You have survived so much," he said. "I am amazed by your strength. You make me see things differently." Naeli smiled softly. "We survive by helping each other. That is what makes us strong. Alone, we are vulnerable, but together, we can face the cold, the danger, and the unknown." Their teamwork became seamless. They anticipated each other's needs, supported one another in tasks, and communicated without words in ways that only came from shared experience and trust. Even in the moments of silence, there was understanding, a recognition of the bond they had forged in the firelight and snow. Yet, they both knew that challenges still awaited. The world beyond the cabin was unpredictable, and threats could appear at any moment. But for now, they focused on the present, on survival, on learning from each other, and on building a connection that neither had expected but both had come to value deeply. In those quiet, snowy days, they discovered the power of trust, the strength found in companionship, and the courage that comes from understanding and respecting one another. The harsh winter no longer felt quite as threatening, because together they had found warmth, safety, and a fragile but enduring hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow, Naeli and Thomas sat by the fire, sharing a simple meal and the comfort of each other's presence. Outside, the world remained harsh and uncertain, but inside the cabin, they had created a place where kindness, trust, and understanding flourished. And in that quiet moment, both realized that their lives had changed in ways they could never have imagined. The bond they shared, born out of necessity and strengthened by trust, was now a source of courage and resilience. Together, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that survival was not just about the body, but about the heart, the mind, and the connection between them. Winter had begun to loosen its grip, but the plains remained harsh and unforgiving. The snow had softened in some areas, but the wind still cut sharply across the open land. Thomas and Naeli had grown accustomed to their routines, tending to the cabin, caring for the animals, and navigating the frozen land together. But they both knew that safety was fragile, and danger could arrive without warning. One morning, while Thomas checked the perimeter of the ranch, Naeli noticed something unusual in the snow. Fresh footprints, too deliberate to belong to animals, led toward the cabin. She motioned for Thomas to come closer, her expression tense. "Someone has been here," she said quietly. "They have followed the trails and I think they may be looking for me." Thomas frowned, a sense of unease settling in his chest. "Do you recognize them?" he asked. Naomi shook her head. "No, but we cannot ignore it. We must be ready." The pair began preparations immediately. They reinforced the cabin, moved some supplies to hidden locations, and ensured that the firewood and food were accessible but not obvious to anyone outside. They worked together with quiet urgency, the bond they had formed through weeks of shared survival now proving invaluable. Every movement was coordinated, every decision made with caution and care. As the day wore on, the wind grew colder and the shadows lengthened. Thomas kept watch at the window while Naomi moved quietly around the cabin, checking the perimeter and listening to the subtle sounds of the land. She had learned to read the environment with astonishing skill, noticing the faintest disturbances in the snow, the broken branches that indicated a human presence, and the shifts in wind that could carry sound or scent. "That way," Naomi whispered, pointing to a distant ridge. "Someone has passed there recently. They are still moving but slowly. Perhaps they do not know we are aware of them." Thomas nodded. "Then we wait. We cannot confront them blindly. We must be smart and we must protect ourselves." Night fell and the stormy wind carried a sense of tension that neither could ignore. They huddled near the fire, their movements quiet, speaking only in low tones. The cabin, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed exposed, fragile against the possibility of intrusion. Both understood that this was a test, not just of skill and preparation, but of trust and courage. As the hours passed, the footprints in the snow grew closer. Naomi suggested they move some belongings to safer locations while Thomas kept watch. Together, they prepared for the possibility of confrontation, but neither wanted unnecessary violence. Their goal was to protect themselves, not to provoke or escalate the situation. Suddenly, a faint sound carried across the snow, a snap of a branch, careful but deliberate. Naomi froze, listening intently. "They are coming," she whispered. "Stay calm. We must be ready but not reckless." Thomas's heart raced, but he trusted Naomi's instincts. He had watched her survive in conditions he could hardly imagine, and he knew that she was capable of making decisions that could save them both. He nodded, and together they positioned themselves near the door and windows, observing silently. The figures appeared, cautious and slow, moving through the snow as if sensing something unusual. Naomi whispered instructions to Thomas, guiding him to positions where they could see without being seen, where they could act if necessary but avoid direct conflict. Their preparation was meticulous, and their movements were quiet, practiced, and precise. As the strangers approached the cabin, Naomi and Thomas used their knowledge of the land to anticipate their movements. They adjusted the firelight to avoid drawing attention, covered tracks, and even created false signs to mislead the intruders. Their combined skills, honed over weeks of trust and cooperation, turned the cabin into a stronghold that was more than just wood and stone. It was a place fortified by knowledge, respect for the land, and careful strategy. The intruders paused near the edge of the property, unsure of their surroundings. Naomi observed them carefully. "They are cautious," she said. "Perhaps they suspect something, but they do not know what. We must use that advantage." Thomas nodded, feeling a mix of fear and admiration. He had relied on tools and experience for years, but Naomi's instincts and understanding of human behavior added a new dimension to their preparedness. Together, they were more than a rancher and a visitor. They were a team, capable of anticipating and countering threats without resorting to rash action. Hours passed with tense silence, each sound of the wind and snow magnified in their awareness. They could see the intruders moving in patterns, probing, trying to understand the landscape and the cabin's defenses. Naomi whispered to Thomas about each movement, analyzing their intentions and predicting their next steps. Every observation, every calculation, strengthened their sense of control and confidence. Eventually, the intruders grew frustrated. They had been searching for hours without finding anything definitive. Naeli suggested a clever tactic, leaving misleading signs of movement to draw the intruders away from the cabin. Thomas helped implement her plan, carefully moving objects and creating tracks that suggested the cabin had been abandoned. By morning, the intruders had moved on, deceived by the subtle signs and careful planning. Naeli and Thomas waited a few hours longer to ensure the threat had passed, their exhaustion palpable but their relief deep. They had faced danger not through confrontation, but through intelligence, strategy, and cooperation. As the sun rose, casting golden light across the snow, Thomas and Naeli stepped outside. The landscape was calm, peaceful, and deceptively quiet. They walked together, surveying the area, making sure no traces of their preparations remained. There was pride in their movements, a recognition that they had survived and overcome a test that could have ended in disaster. Back inside the cabin, they shared a quiet meal, speaking little but understanding much. Their bond had been strengthened not just by daily life, but by the shared experience of facing real danger. Trust had been tested, and it had proven strong. Each understood the other's strengths, fears, and resilience. They were no longer merely survivor and helper. They were partners, bound by necessity, courage, and respect. In the days that followed, they focused on recovery and routine, but the experience left a lasting impression. Naeli's confidence grew, and Thomas's understanding of her knowledge and instincts deepened. They both knew that future challenges might come, but they were better prepared, more united, and more capable than before. One evening, as the wind softened and the snow began to melt slightly under the late winter sun, Naeli spoke quietly. "We have faced danger and survived. But the world beyond this cabin is not always kind. We must be careful always." Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We will be ready. Together, we can handle whatever comes. I trust you, Naeli, and I hope you trust me too." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I do. Trust is what keeps us alive even when the world is harsh. And I trust you, Thomas." From that moment on, their partnership felt unshakable. They moved together with quiet confidence, sharing not just tasks but the burden of vigilance, the responsibility of survival, and the understanding that true strength comes from cooperation, respect, and trust. The winter continued to test them, but now it was less a threat and more a backdrop to their growing friendship. Each challenge, whether a storm, a broken fence, or an unexpected visitor, was met with teamwork, patience, and careful strategy. Their bond, forged in adversity, became a source of hope and resilience, proving that even in the harshest conditions, courage, intelligence, and trust could prevail. And so, life continued in the cabin, quiet but alive, tense but hopeful. Thomas and Naeli had faced real danger and emerged stronger. They had discovered the power of careful planning, shared knowledge, and deep trust. They had learned that courage was not just physical, but also emotional and mental, and that survival depended not just on strength, but on the ability to work together with respect, patience, and understanding. In the weeks that followed, they reflected on what had happened, knowing that more challenges could arise, but confident in their ability to face them. The intruders had tested their skills and resolve, but they had triumphed through intelligence and partnership. And in that triumph, they discovered a truth that would stay with them always. Even in a world filled with uncertainty, danger, and fear, trust and cooperation could create safety, hope, and a sense of belonging. The cabin, once simply a shelter, had become a symbol of resilience and partnership. Inside, the warmth of the fire reflected not only physical comfort, but also the bond between two people who had learned to rely on each other completely. Outside, the snow-covered plains remained beautiful and harsh, a constant reminder of the challenges that life could present. But together, Thomas and Naeli were ready for whatever the future might bring. The days grew longer, and the snow slowly began to melt, revealing the brown and green of the plains beneath. The winter had been harsh, but it had passed, leaving the world quiet, crisp, and full of possibility. Inside the cabin, Thomas and Naeli had grown accustomed to their routines, yet both knew that their time together in this place was temporary. The outside world was calling, and Naeli's journey was not yet over. For weeks, she had recovered fully, regaining the strength that had been sapped by cold, hunger, and fear. Her fingers and toes were no longer stiff from frostbite. Her body had rebuilt itself, and her mind had grown sharper, strengthened by the challenges she had faced. She had learned much about life on the ranch, how to care for animals, how to repair the cabin, how to read the signs of weather and land, and Thomas had learned just as much from her. The knowledge of the plains, the wisdom of observation, and the lessons of resilience that came from living close to nature. One morning, Naeli sat by the window, watching the sun glint off the melting snow. She had made her decision. She would continue her journey to find her people, to reconnect with those who had survived, and to honor the memory of those she had lost. Yet, leaving the cabin and Thomas felt impossibly difficult. This place had become a sanctuary, a safe haven where she had been cared for and protected. More than that, she had found trust and friendship, a bond that had grown slowly but deeply through the long weeks of winter. Thomas noticed her quiet reflection. "You've been thinking," he said gently, breaking the silence. Naeli turned to him, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Yes," she said, "I must continue my journey. My people, I need to find them. But I will not forget what you have done for me, Thomas. You saved my life. You gave me warmth, safety, and trust when I had almost lost all hope." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. He had come to care deeply for her, not just as someone he had protected, but as a person who had changed his life. Yet he knew she could not stay forever, and he would not hold her back. "I understand," he said softly. "You must go. But you will always have a place here if you ever need it, and you will always have my respect and friendship." The days leading up to her departure were filled with quiet preparations. Naeli packed only what she could carry, moving lightly and efficiently. Thomas helped her gather supplies, ensuring she had enough food, blankets, and essentials for the journey. They worked together, not as teacher and student, but as equals, partners in survival and trust. During the evenings, they spent long hours by the fire, talking and sharing stories one last time. Naeli told him more about her family, about her hopes for the future, and about the traditions of her people that she carried in her heart. Thomas shared memories of his life on the ranch, the lessons he had learned from solitude, and the realization that kindness and trust could flourish even in the harshest conditions. On the night before she was to leave, they walked outside together, the stars shining brightly over the plains. The air was cold but clear, the wind gentle compared to the storms they had endured. Naeli looked at the horizon, feeling the pull of the world beyond the cabin, yet also the warmth of connection she had found here. "You have taught me so much," Thomas said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "Not just about survival, but about trust, courage, and the strength that comes from helping each other. I will never forget you, Naeli." "And I will never forget you," Naeli replied, a small smile touching her lips. "You reminded me that not everyone is an enemy. That kindness exists, even in unexpected places. You gave me hope when I had almost lost it." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind carrying the faint rustle of the melting snow, the world around them vast, quiet, and full of possibilities. Then gently, Naeli hugged him, a gesture of gratitude and connection. Thomas returned the hug, feeling the weight of the weeks they had spent together, the challenges they had faced, and the trust they had built. The morning came, crisp and bright. Naeli was ready. She adjusted her blankets, checked her supplies, and took a deep breath. Thomas walked her to the edge of the cabin, standing beside her as she prepared to leave. "You will be safe," he said firmly, though his voice carried the sadness of parting. "Use everything you have learned. Trust yourself as much as you have trusted me." "I will," Naomi said, her voice steady, "and I will carry your lessons with me. You have shown me the meaning of kindness and trust, and I will not forget it." With a final glance at the cabin, the firelight flickering behind her, Naomi stepped into the snow. Each step was careful but confident. She moved across the plains, her figure small against the vast landscape, yet strong with determination. Thomas watched until she disappeared over the horizon, feeling both loss and pride. He knew that she would survive, not just because of her skills, but because of the courage and resilience he had come to admire so deeply. The cabin returned to its quiet rhythm, but something had changed within Thomas. He felt a warmth that went beyond the fire, a sense of connection that had grown from weeks of trust, cooperation, and shared experiences. He understood that helping Naomi had changed him as much as it had changed her. He had learned to see beyond fear, beyond prejudice, and beyond the surface of appearances. He had learned the value of empathy, patience, and the courage to act when it mattered most. Days passed, and Thomas often found himself looking toward the horizon, wondering how Naomi was faring. He imagined her moving through the plains with the same careful determination, relying on her skills and instincts, carrying the lessons of their time together. And though he missed her, he felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she was free, strong, and capable. Meanwhile, Naomi continued her journey, moving with confidence and awareness. She navigated the plains, using everything she had learned from survival in the wild and from her time with Thomas. She reflected on their time together, the warmth she had found in the cabin, and the trust that had grown between them. Every step was a reminder that kindness and courage could be found even in the harshest circumstances, and that human connection could endure even when separated by distance. Along her journey, Naomi encountered other travelers and villagers. She used her knowledge and skills to help those in need, quietly passing on the lessons she had learned. Stories of her resilience and kindness began to spread, not as tales of fear or conflict, but as examples of survival, trust, and the power of compassion. Back at the cabin, Thomas tended to his routines with renewed purpose. He cared for the animals, repaired fences, and maintained the cabin, but he also carried the memory of their time together. Naomi's presence had left an indelible mark on him, a reminder that even in isolation, one could find connection, understanding, and growth. He realized that his life would always be enriched by the experience, and that the bond they had shared would remain with him, quietly guiding his actions and shaping his perspective. As spring approached, bringing new life to the plains, both Thomas and Naomi continued their journeys. Though physically apart, they carried the lessons of trust, courage, and empathy within them. Naomi's journey led her closer to her people, giving her hope and purpose, while Thomas found fulfillment in knowing that he had made a difference, that he had acted with kindness and courage when it mattered most. In the quiet moments when Thomas sat by the fire or walked among the animals, he often thought of Naomi. He remembered her strength, her resilience, and her wisdom. And in those memories, he found comfort, inspiration, and a sense of connection that transcended the distance between them. For Naomi, the lessons learned at the cabin stayed with her. She navigated the world with confidence and care, helping others and honoring her past. She knew that her survival and growth were shaped not only by her own courage, but also by the trust and friendship she had found with Thomas. Their bond, though formed in the brief span of a harsh winter, had left an enduring mark on both their lives. And so, the story of Thomas and Naomi came to its quiet conclusion, not with grand events or dramatic resolutions, but with the enduring truth that compassion, trust, and courage can change lives. Even in the harshest conditions, even in the coldest winters, warmth can be found in human connection. In the end, both Thomas and Naeli had discovered something greater than survival. They had discovered the power of empathy, the strength of trust, and the enduring value of kindness. Their paths would continue separately, but the lessons, memories, and bonds they had formed would remain, shaping their choices, guiding their actions, and reminding them that even in a vast, uncertain world, hope, warmth, and connection could always be found.